This is a very famous urban legend that I am sure, if not all, then at least 90% of the people watching this video know about. It's about the experiment where 5 people were locked in a room to study sleep deprivation. Hello again, it's me. And today I will decode for you the Russian sleep experiment from the late 1940s. Research reveals that the Russians conducted an experiment where they kept 5 people awake continuously for 15 days using an odorless gas mixture. These individuals were kept in a sealed environment, with oxygen being pumped in continuously. But alongside it, the gas mixture was maintained at the appropriate ratio to keep them alive and, above all, sleepless. In that spacious room, they had everything they needed: books, chairs to rest on, a water supply and sanitation system, the necessary amount of dry food to sustain life, and they were all political prisoners captured during World War II. In the first 5 days of the experiment, the prisoners continuously yelled, asking if they would be allowed to return home if they complied with the Russians' demands. Meanwhile, the conversations among the 5 individuals were constantly recorded, and their behavior was observed by a system of hidden cameras. The gossip of the 5 individuals usually revolved around their past experiences, family, war. And when the 4th day approached, the stories gradually became gloomy and profound. On the 5th day, the individuals tended to recount what they had done and the events that brought them there. Some showed signs of delusional disorders. They stopped chatting with each other and whispered into the microphones they used when requesting something. Their whispered words were difficult to hear with low tones, or they just stared intently at the one-way mirror where scientists observed them day and night. Perhaps they thought they would survive 15 days without sleep, and scientists thought it was due to the influence of the gas. On the 9th day, one of them began to scream wildly, running around the room, shouting at the top of his lungs for 3 continuous hours, until what he could produce were meaningless mutterings, probably because his vocal cords had snapped, the scientists thought. However, the most surprising thing was the reaction of the remaining individuals, the comrades of that man. They continued to whisper to the microphone until the 2nd individual began to scream. Suddenly, the screams ceased, and the murmurs in the microphone also fell silent. 3 more days passed, and the scientists feverishly checked the microphones hourly to see if they were malfunctioning, because it was impossible for 5 people in the same sealed room not to produce any noise. They didn't die. The oxygen consumption showed that all 5 individuals were still alive and well. On the 10th day, the camera system suddenly lost signal, but the experiment continued. The researchers could only rely on the microphone system, a small one-way mirror, and the dim light in the room where the 5 people were housed. Until the 14th day, the scientists and the military prepared for the final solution. They established communication with the room, making some offers in the hope of receiving signs of life, even faint ones, from the individuals they thought were dead or turned into vegetables. One person said, "We'll go in to check the microphones. Stay away from the door and lie on the floor. If you cooperate, you'll be free immediately." In response to the suggestion of freedom, there was a short and concise answer, calmly stating, "We don't want to be free anymore." Arguments erupted between the scientists and the military officers who had invested in this experiment. They couldn't come up with any explanation, and they decided to open the room on the 15th day at midnight. Oxygen was pumped into the room, and the gas slowly leaked out. Immediately, urgent voices begged them to pump the gas back into the room, pleading as if their lives depended on it. Soldiers began to enter the room, and they began to scream more wildly than before, and what the soldiers saw seemed to surpass their imagination. 4 individuals were still alive, but no one dared to say whether they were truly alive. The food rations were still intact, indicating that they hadn't eaten anything since the 5th day. In one corner of the room, there was a pile of flesh and internal organs of a person, sealed off from the room's drainage system. It seemed like this person had scratched at his chest and abdomen continuously until death. The room was now flooded with water above ankle level, and the 4 surviving individuals also showed signs of self-mutilation. They had skinned parts of their chests and abdomens, with skin and blood still clinging to their bony, emaciated fingers. "How can we call them humans?" the soldiers said to each other. Weak bodies, blood seeping, almost skinless chests revealing rib cages, peeled-off skin showing red veins. Yet digestive organs were still functioning, capable of digesting food, as well as the respiratory system. They discussed whether they should take these people out of the room and end the experiment. The soldiers refused to return to that room after what they had witnessed. The 4 individuals alternately pleaded to continue living in the room with that gas. Violence was applied, and the 4 individuals reacted wildly, as if they used all their strength to resist coercion. They bit their necks, scratched their faces. One soldier's testicle was severed, and almost one leg was severed due to this brutality. At that moment, one experimental subject continuously bled. The medic performed blood transfusions and administered sedatives to the remaining subjects, but it seemed futile. Despite being injected with 10 times the normal amount of sedatives, they still resisted like wild animals, driven to desperation. In the midst of chaotic panic spreading throughout the station, no one knew what was happening. After all, only 3 people survived after the forced experiment. They were immediately tightly bound and transferred to a research room, all the while pleading incessantly to inhale that gas. The first individual was placed on the operating table. He no longer had a tracheal tube because it had been torn due to screaming for too long. He could only nod and shake his head when a doctor suggested he inhale the gas again. He continuously nodded, indicating agreement, even to the request for surgery without anesthesia. The surgical process lasted 6 hours, beyond what a human could endure. A nurse rewrote her horrific experience. He always smiled at me whenever I caught his eye. When the surgery ended, instead of remaining still as he had for the past 6 hours, he continued to resist until someone put a pen to paper. What he wanted became clear. He wanted to undergo further surgery. The second individual, in a similar state, also underwent surgery but did not resist, only continuously laughing bitterly, a laughter of complete madness. The moments that seemed like clarity for this person were when he inhaled that gas. When researchers asked what they needed the gas for, there was only one answer: to stay awake. Panic spread throughout the station. No one knew what was happening, and right at that moment, the commander ordered all 3 subjects to be locked up, preparing for a funeral. But just before he could give the order, a doctor managed to snatch a shotgun and shot him in the head. Just as this general was about to step out of the room, with fear, he pointed the gun at the only remaining subject and asked, "What are you?" The third subject smiled and replied, "You forget us so easily, don't you? We are also you. We are the madness that always lurks just beneath the surface, begging for release every second, every minute. With your animalistic minds, we are what you try to escape in every sleep, what you try to soothe whenever you seek the peace of a quiet night, which you never find." The doctor froze, and moments later, he shot the research subject dead with a shot to the chest. Those were the last words before the subject breathed his last breath, almost free. And that's one of the most famous urban legends in the world. So, is it really true? The answer is no. I don't know if there has ever been an experiment like that in history, but the stories about this picture are definitely not true. And the truth is much simpler than you think.